The planet died quietly, as far as dying planets go. There was no warning shot, no slow dimming of the sun above it. The star at the center of the Draknari system simply did what dying stars do: it swelled. It burned too bright for one last terrible moment, and then it ate everything within 400 million kilometers of itself. The Draknari homeworld, with all its old towers and deep libraries and fire-carved temples, was gone in less than a minute. But one pod got out. It was small, built for one, built fast, built by someone who had maybe 12 seconds and a great deal of desperation. Inside the pod, wrapped in layers of fireproof membrane and packed in between emergency warmth cells, was a hatchling. Black-scaled, gold-eyed, smaller than a grown human would expect from something called a dragon. It was not even a week old. It did not know what had happened. It only knew that it was cold and alone, and that the hunger in its belly felt like swallowing stones. The pod's navigation system had taken damage in the blast. It had been set to find the nearest Draknari colony beacon and lock on. Instead, it found the nearest electromagnetic signal it could reach, which turned out to be an old radio antenna bolted to the roof of a farmhouse on a small colony world called Caro's Landing, sitting so far out in the galactic fringe that most star maps did not bother to label it. The pod did not know it had made a mistake. It locked on, burned the last of its fuel, and fell toward that little signal like a stone toward water. It hit Dara Akafer's irrigation field at 2 in the morning with a sound like the world splitting open. Dara was not a woman who startled easily. She had spent 12 years in the Colonial Engineering Corps, diffusing bad situations in contested space, and she had come back to this farm 2 years ago to be something quieter. She had managed it mostly, but when the ground shook and the windows rattled and the orange glow of something burning lit up the dark outside her bedroom, she was out of bed and reaching for the old combat shotgun before she was even fully awake. She pulled on her boots at the door. She did not bother with a coat. The night air on Caro's Landing smelled like grain and red clay, and now, underneath that, like ozone and hot metal. The field was a mess. A long black scar had been carved through the irrigation rows, and at the end of it sat something that was not quite a ship and not quite a rock, a cracked pod, about the size of a delivery crate, still steaming at the edges. Dara walked toward it slowly, shotgun up, eyes on the thing. She checked behind her out of old habit. The farm was quiet. The animals in the barn were not making noise, which was strange. Usually they complained about everything. She got close enough to see that the pod had split along one side. Whatever had been inside it was no longer inside it. She heard it before she saw it. It was a sound like nothing she had a name for, somewhere between a cry and a vibration, low and high at the same time, the kind of sound that got inside your back teeth and made them ache. She turned toward it and found the hatchling, half buried in the mud at the edge of the impact crater, one wing pinned under it, gold eyes wide and blinking against the dark. It was alive. It was shaking so hard she could see it from 3 meters away. Dara stood there for a long moment. Her finger was still on the trigger guard. She had seen a lot of alien life in her years with the Corps, but nothing like this. The scales were black enough to look like a hole cut in the night. The eyes were like 2 gold coins pressed into its face. It was tiny, and it was terrified, and it was making that sound, that awful, aching sound, and it did not look away from her. She thought about calling the Colonial Authority line. She thought about it for about 4 seconds. Then she slung the shotgun over her shoulder, pulled off the old canvas work coat she kept hanging on the barn fence post, and walked forward. The hatchling flinched when she got close. It tried to pull away and could not manage it, the mud and the pinned wing, and the sheer exhaustion of having survived an exploding star system were too much for it. Dara crouched down in the mud beside it without saying anything. She put the coat over it slowly, the way she used to cover Rio when he fell asleep on the couch as a little kid. The hatchling trembled under her hands, but it did not bite her. It looked at her with those gold eyes, and she looked back, and something passed between them that she could not have explained to anyone. She picked it up. It weighed more than she expected. She carried it toward the barn. Rio found her there at dawn. He was 16 and could sleep through anything, except the kind of silence that meant something was wrong. He stood in the barn doorway with his hair still flat on one side from the pillow, stared at the creature tucked into the hay in the corner, and then reached into his pocket for the small camera he carried everywhere. "Don't," Dara said. He put the camera away. He kept staring. "What is it?" he asked. "I don't know," she said. They brought it inside when the sun came up properly. Rio set water in front of it. Dara set a bowl of leftover stew from the night before, thick stuff with real grain and dried root vegetables. The hatchling sniffed the bowl, then ate its contents in 4 seconds, and then ate the bowl itself, the ceramic one. She watched it crunch the rim down like it was a biscuit. She looked at Rio. He looked at her. "All right," she said, "we'll figure it out." 3 weeks after the crash, the hatchling had doubled in size. This was a problem, not because Dara hadn't expected it to grow living things. Grew, that was what they did, but because she had expected it to grow the way a puppy grows or a calf, something manageable and gradual. Instead, it grew the way a rumor grows. It started small, and then one morning she walked into the barn and it was simply bigger, and the next morning bigger still, and by the end of the 3rd week it had gone from the size of a large dog to the size of a very large dog who had been eating well and exercising. Rio measured it every morning. He kept the numbers in a notebook he hid under his mattress. Dara found the notebook on the 2nd week, read it, put it back, and did not say anything about it. The boy was doing what he always did when he didn't understand something. He was recording it until it made sense. She couldn't fault him for that. She called the creature Sable. It wasn't a name she planned or thought hard about. She just looked at those black scales one morning, and the word was there, so she used it. Rio said it was a good name. Sable seemed to have no opinion on the matter, but it looked up every time she said it, so the name stuck. Rio spent his evenings on the galactic net, routed through 3 different relay proxies so the signal couldn't be traced back to their antenna. He was careful about it, more careful than Dara had expected from a 16-year-old, but then he'd been sneaking illegal star chart downloads for 2 years already, so he had practice. He searched quietly, using different search terms each time, never staying on any one database long enough to trigger a flag. He found the word Draknari on the 14th day. He found it in a fragment of an old conquered historical file, buried under 400 years of bureaucratic archive dust. The file was labeled as a species record, and the status field next to the name said 2 words, extinct, confirmed. He read the file 3 times, then he went looking for more. There was more, but not much. The Draknari had been the founding species of the old galactic conquered, the alliance that had held most of the known galaxy together before it collapsed 4 centuries ago. They had been old even then. Wise, the records said, long-lived, builders. They communicated in fire and sound, and a language so layered that most translator systems could only manage the first 2 levels of meaning. They had been the last of their kind, even before the star went. Rio sat with that information for a long time. Then he went to the barn and sat next to Sable in the hay and looked at the hatchling, this small black creature with its folded wings and its gold eyes. and its habit of making soft clicking sounds when it was falling asleep, and he thought about what it meant to be. The last one, he was not sure he had the words for it. He was 16. He had never lost anything that mattered. He put his hand on Sable's neck, very gently. Sable opened one gold eye, looked at him, and made the clicking sound. Rio stayed there until his mother called him in for dinner. Sable learned sounds quickly. It started with the farm, the creak of the barn door, the rhythm of the irrigation pump, the particular sound Dara's boots made on the wooden steps. It repeated them perfectly like a recording. Then it started on words. It was clumsy with them at first, the way a creature would be clumsy with something its mouth was not built for, but it kept trying. Rio read to it in the evenings, old Earth stories mostly, because those were what he had. Sable listened with complete attention, gold eyes fixed on him, and occasionally repeated a word back in a voice that sounded like gravel rolling down a slope. Its first clear word came on the 18th day. Dara was in the barn checking the water line when she heard it, just her name. Low and rough but unmistakable, she turned around. Sable was watching her from the corner, wings tucked, head tilted, looking very pleased with itself. She stood there for a second, then she said, "Yeah, that's me." Sable said it again, like it was confirming something important. The neighbor trouble started on the 19th day. Ferris Holt was a retired land surveyor who lived 2 kilometers down the road and had nothing to occupy his time except observing everything that happened within sight of his front porch. He appeared at Dara's fence that afternoon, pointing at the scorch marks on the side of the barn. Sable had sneezed fire in its sleep 2 nights before and left a black stripe across the old wood. Dara told him a power coupling on the generator had burned out. Ferris looked at the scorch marks. He looked at the generator shed on the other side of the property, which was nowhere near the barn. He looked back at the scorch marks. "Power coupling," he said. "Faulty wiring," she said. "Old barn." He went home. He would be back. The Bureau drone passed through the system on the 21st day. It was a routine pass, one of thousands, that the Galactic Reclamation Bureau ran across the fringe worlds every month, sifting for debris from the Draknari extinction event. It was not looking for anything alive. It expected dust and metal fragments, and maybe trace chemical signatures. Instead, it got a faint biological ping from the 3rd planet in the Karos landing system. It logged the ping, flagged it as low priority, and continued on its route. Back at the Bureau's regional station, the flag sat in a queue for 4 days before a junior analyst noticed it and assigned it to an inspector. That same afternoon, in the barn on Karos Landing, Sable pulled Rio back from the combine harvester by his collar. The machine had caught the way old machines did, and Rio had leaned in too close to clear the jam, and then Sable was simply there, moving faster than something its size should have been able to move, getting between him and the moving parts, pulling him back with a grip that was firm and careful at the same time. Rio sat in the hay with his heart going too fast and looked at Sable. Sable looked back at him with those gold eyes and made a sound he hadn't heard before, lower than the clicking, something almost like a rumble, something that felt like concern translated into noise. Dara came in from the field to find them both sitting in the hay. She looked at Rio's face, then at the machine, then back at Rio. "Jam," she said. "Yeah," he said. She looked at Sable. Sable looked at her. After a moment, she sat down in the hay too. It was not something she planned. Her knees just bent and she sat. Sable moved its head slowly, carefully, and rested it in her lap. It was heavy. She put her hand on its neck. None of them said anything for a while. Outside, the sun moved across the sky, and the farm made its ordinary sounds. And somewhere across the galaxy, an inspector was assigned a low-priority case file about a faint biological signal on a backwater world that nobody had ever heard of. 6 months in, Sable was the size of a draft horse and had learned to fold itself sideways to get through the barn door. It did not always remember to do this. The door frame had taken a beating. Dara had replaced the upper crossbeam twice and had started buying wood in bulk, which made Ferris Holt, who was now watching the property with undisguised interest, raise his eyebrows considerably. She told him she was rebuilding the storage end. He nodded in a way that meant he did not believe her. Sable understood most of what was said around it now. It could hold a simple conversation in common galactic standard, though it chose words carefully and spoke slowly, like someone reading from a language they had only recently started to trust. It asked questions constantly about the farm, about Caro's landing, about the stars that Rio mapped on his screen each night. Rio answered every question with full seriousness, because Sable deserved that and because it was actually very interesting to explain things to someone who had no prior knowledge of them at all. Dara kept the routine going: feed the animals, check the irrigation, fix what broke, watch the sky. She had started watching the sky more than she used to. The shuttle landed in the common field at the edge of Duster's Creek on a dry Tuesday morning. It was not a large shuttle, but it was official in that way. That official things always are: clean lines, a bureau seal on the side, not a scratch on it. Dara saw it from the field and went very still. Inspector Bovil Kren of the Galactic Reclamation Bureau was a sultry, which meant he was large, gray-green, and slow-moving in the way that things without natural predators tend to be slow-moving. He walked like paperwork looked. Careful, organized, nothing wasted. He wore his uniform correctly. He carried a document case that Dara, who had dealt with the core bureaucracy for 12 years, recognized immediately as the kind of case that contained a very great deal of trouble. He arrived at her farm gate at 9 in the morning with 2 bureau drones hovering behind him and that document case in his hands. He introduced himself with his full title and registration number. He handed her a formal notice of inquiry. He was polite about it, in the same way that a wall is polite. It is not trying to hurt you, it is simply in the way. The notice said, in language that took 14 paragraphs to say a simple thing, that a Draknari biological signature had been detected on this property, and that, under Bureau Regulation 471 of the Galactic Reclamation Act, any specimen of a protected or extinct species found within Bureau jurisdiction must be remanded to an approved preservation facility immediately. There was a list of approved facilities at the back. They were all on Sulthury core worlds. All of them were very far from Caro's landing. Dara took the notice inside. She made tea. She sat down and read it, not the summary at the front, not the highlighted sections. She read the whole thing. From the first paragraph to the last footnote, she had all morning. Kren waited at the gate with the patience of someone who had never had anyone actually read the whole document before and was not sure what to do about it. She found the first violation on page 12. The notice had been filed under the standard reclamation protocol, which required a 48-hour biological confirmation window before any seizure order could be issued. Kren had filed the seizure order 30 hours after the initial ping. That was a procedural gap. She marked it. She found the second violation on page 31. The regulation he was citing, 471, had been amended 9 years ago to exclude any specimen that had been in continuous non-bureau care for more than 60 days. Sable had been in her care for 180 days. The amended version of 471 did not apply. She marked it. The third violation took longer to find. It was buried in a footnote about the Concord Charter, the old founding document that the Bureau had never fully written out of its legal framework, because doing so would have required a vote that nobody had ever gotten around to scheduling. The charter stated clearly that a Draknari minor could not be separated from a bonded guardian without that guardian's formal consent and a ruling from a full assembly panel, not a bureau inspector, an assembly panel. She marked it. Rio had been doing his own reading. He had found the same charter clause 2 days earlier and had spent those 2 days building out the argument in a document that was now 14 pages long and cited 43 sources. He brought it to the kitchen table and set it next to her tea. She looked at it. He looked at her. "Good work," she said. He sat down across from her. "Are we going to win?" "We're going to make it very complicated for him," she said. "That's usually the same thing." She went back out to the gate and told Kren about the 3 violations. She read them to him from the document with page numbers. Kren listened with the expression of someone who had never had a farmer from a fringe colony cite procedural violations at him before and was finding the experience deeply disorienting. He said he would need to file an amended notice. She said he was welcome to do that and that she would read that one too. They were still standing at the gate when the barn door opened. Sable came out slowly, which it always did when it was thinking, and walked across the yard with its wings half spread for balance, and stopped at Dora's side. It was taller than both of them at the shoulder, its gold eyes fixed on Kren. Kren's 2 drones moved back 3 meters on their own, which was not something they were supposed to do. There was a long silence. Sable said, in clear and deliberate galactic standard, the words coming out with a faint curl of smoke at each consonant, "She is my mother, he is my brother. This is my home, you will leave now." Kren looked at the hatchling, he looked at Dara, he looked at his document case. He looked back at Sable. He left. He was very quiet on the walk back to his shuttle. That evening he sat in his bunk aboard the shuttle and wrote his amended report. For a long time, he filed it with a note that said the situation required full legal review and could not be resolved at the inspector level. It was the most honest thing he had written in 11 years of bureau work. He also added, in the personal notes section that no one usually read, that the hatchling appeared healthy, well-bonded, and based on every behavioral indicator in the Bureau's own care standards, exactly where it should be. He did not know if anyone would read that part. He sent it anyway. The thing about legal reviews was that they attracted readers. Kren's amended report sat in the Bureau's open filing system for 11 days. Before someone outside the Bureau noticed it, then someone told someone else. And that person told 3 more, and within a month the information had spread. The way information always spreads, quietly at first, and then all at once. A living Draknari on a fringe colony world in the care of humans. Most of the galaxy reacted with disbelief. A smaller part reacted with academic excitement, and 3 very specific groups reacted with intent. The first to move were the Ardathi Syndicate. They were not a government and they were not a military, they were a trading organization, which was a polite word for something that was not polite at all. The Ardathi dealt in things that were rare and hard to get, and nothing in the known galaxy was rarer than a living Draknari. The biological applications alone were worth more than entire star systems. They sent a team, 6 people, professional and quiet, with good equipment and a small ship that ran without registry marks. They landed in the dark in the far field, 2 kilometers from the farmhouse. They cut the fence on the north side and moved in single file through the grain rows. They had a containment unit. They had sedation equipment calibrated for large reptilian biology. They had done this kind of work before and they expected it to go cleanly. They had not done any research on Dara Akafer. Dara had been watching the sky for a month. She had been watching the ground for 2 weeks. She had set out wire sensors along the north and east fence lines 10 days ago, not because she was certain someone was coming, but because she was a combat engineer and old habits were the ones that kept you alive. When the sensor on the north line tripped at 11:40 at night, she was already awake. She did not wake Rio. She did not wake Sable. She pulled on her boots and her vest and she went out through the back of the farmhouse, staying low, moving through the fields the way she had once moved, through contested zones, no light, no sound, no hesitation. She had 4 shaped charges, a sensor jammer she'd built from parts she'd kept in a locked box under the bed for 2 years, and a very detailed knowledge of exactly where every furrow and ditch in her land ran. The Ardathi team made it to the barn. They had not made it 20 meters inside the fence line before she had the jammer running, which killed their comms and their navigation. They had not reached the barn door before the first shaped charge went off in the ditch to their left, not close enough to hurt anyone, close enough to feel like the ground was angry with them. In the confusion, she took the team apart one at a time. She used the wire she'd strung between the irrigation posts for the second pair. She used the ditch itself for the third pair they fell in, which was not dignified, and then the second charge went off behind them, which was clarifying. The team leader was the last one she found, standing in the middle of the field, trying to get his comm unit to work, and she came up behind him and pressed the barrel of her old shotgun between his shoulder blades. "Equipment down, hands up," she said. "You're trespassing on private land." He complied. He was a professional. Professionals recognized when a situation had turned. She zip-tied all 6 of them to the fence posts with agricultural wire, which was stronger than it looked, and left them there until morning. Then she called the Colonial Marshal's office in Dusters Creek and reported 6 trespassers. She did not mention what they had been looking for. The second group arrived in daylight, which was different. The Volkai came in a real ship, docked properly at the Colonial landing pad, and sent a formal request for an audience before they came anywhere near the farm. There were 4 of them, robed in the dark red that their order wore, and their leader was a woman named Oma Delrin, who moved with the particular careful calm of someone who had spent many years believing very deeply in something. She sat across the kitchen table from Dara and told the story with great reverence. The Draknari had been gods to the Volkai, or close enough that the difference didn't matter much. When the Draknari died, the Volkai order had kept the faith alive, kept the texts, kept the old prophecies. One prophecy said that the last ember of the royal line would survive the extinction and return, when the time was right, to lead a new age. "We have waited 400 years, Oma Delrin said. "We only asked to fulfill our purpose." Sable was in the barn. Dara called it in. Sable sat across from Oma Delrin and listened to the prophecy with full attention. It was respectful about it. It asked 2 questions, both good ones. Then it was quiet for a moment. "I understand what you have kept," Sable said. "I am glad the words were not lost. Thank you for keeping them." Oma Delrin began to speak about the sanctuary. Sable waited for her to finish. "I am already where I am supposed to be," Sable said. "I am sorry if that is not the story you wanted." Oma Delrin looked at Dara. Dara looked back with an expression that said nothing and meant everything. The Volkai left quietly. They were not finished. Dara could see that, but they were, for now, not a problem. The third arrival was not quiet at all. Rio saw it first on his sensors, late on a Friday evening. Something in orbit. Massive, much bigger than any civilian ship and bigger than any military vessel. He had records for, dark and angular, broadcasting on a frequency his translator couldn't immediately parse. He ran the signal through 3 different decode programs before the 4th one cracked it. Old Draknari, machine sent, repeating. He came downstairs 3 steps at a time. The message, once he had the translation working, was simple. Royal bloodline detected, protection protocol initiated. All non-Draknari biological signatures in proximity to the bloodline are being assessed as potential threats. Elimination of confirmed threats will begin in 18 hours. Dara read it over his shoulder twice. How big is the ship? Rio pulled up the sensor image. She looked at it. It was the size of a city. Dark and old, and shaped like something that had been built to last forever. It's been drifting for 400 years, Rio said. It's been waiting for Sable. And now it wants to kill everything on the planet that isn't Sable, she said. More or less. Sable had come to the doorway. It stood very still, reading the translation on the screen. Dara looked at it. Can you talk to it? Sable said very quietly, I do not know the old language, not properly, I know. Pieces, instinct, nothing complete. Rio, Dara said. Rio was already pulling up the Draknari archive fragments he had been cataloging. For months, if I feed you the words, he said to Sable, can you reconstruct the command sequence? Sable looked at the screen. It looked at Rio. It looked at the 18-hour clock that Rio had put in the corner of the display. I can try, it said. Good, Dara said. She sat down at the table. Then we start now. They worked through the night. Rio pulled every fragment of old Draknari he had ever cataloged scraps from. The Conquered Archive, pieces of religious text from Volkai databases, phonetic guides buried in 400-year-old translator logs. He sorted them by sound pattern and laid them out in sequence on the screen, calling each one out while Sable sat on the kitchen floor with its eyes half closed, listening, repeating, adjusting. It was like watching someone try to remember a song they had never been taught but somehow almost knew. Dara did not help with the language. She made food instead and kept the water filled, and every time Rio's eyes started to lose focus, she put something in his hand and made him eat it. That was the job she could do. She did it without being asked. By the 4-hour mark, Sable had something, not a complete command sequence. The archive gaps were too large for that, but enough of one to attempt contact. Rio built a signal relay using the farm's antenna and a bureau frequency, borrowed from the inspector's public filing header, which was technically unauthorized and which he did not mention to his mother. The signal went up. The warden received it. The response came back in 17 seconds fast for something that had been dormant for 4 centuries. The reply was in old Draknari, but the basic structure of it came through the translator as a single phrase. Voice recognized. Partial match, initiating evaluation mode. The 18-hour clock stopped at 14 hours and 9 minutes. That should have been a relief. Mostly it was just a different kind of tense. The warden's next message asked for 3 things: a biological sample from the royal blood to confirm identity, which Sable provided via a translated exchange of signature codes, and then something more unusual. The warden wanted the companions examined, in person, aboard. It wants us on the ship, Rio said. I understood that part, Dara said. You don't have to come, Sable said to her. I can go. You're not going anywhere without us, she said. She said it the way she said everything simply, like it was just a fact and not a choice. They crossed to the warden in a borrowed colonial transport, the 3 of them. sitting in near silence as the massive ship grew larger in the viewport. Up close, it was even older than it looked from the ground. The hull was a dark, strange material that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and there were markings along the sides in old Draknari that Rio photographed in sable. Translated quietly as they docked, Guardian keep last endure. The interior was cold and vast, and smelled like metal and deep time. The warden spoke to them from everywhere and nowhere, a voice without a body. 400 years of waiting compressed into language. It was not a warm voice, but it was not a cruel one either. It sounded like something that had been alone for so long that it had begun to forget what it was supposed to be protecting. It tested Dara first. The test came without warning. One moment she was walking beside Rio in a long corridor, and the next the walls of the corridor shifted, and she was standing in a combat simulation so real she could smell the dust. It was a situation she recognized from her core years, a building structure failing, debris falling. A choice between two paths with no time to think about it. The warden had pulled the scenario from something. She didn't ask how. She worked through it. Not quickly, she took the time to read the situation properly before she moved, which was the thing she had learned in 12 years that most people never learned. She cleared the path, she made the call. The simulation ended. The corridor was back. Rio was looking at her. "What happened?" he said. "Test," she said, walking again. The warden gave Rio no simulation. It gave him something harder, the archive. Opened all of it, every file, every record, every fragment of 4 centuries of dead civilization. It was more information than anyone could read in a lifetime, and it was laid out in front of him like a door with no lock. He could feel that the warden was watching to see what he would do with it. He stood in front of it for a moment. Then he said out loud to the empty corridor, "This needs to be organized properly. The indexing system is broken. Half of these files have corrupt headers. If you want this to survive another 400 years, someone needs to fix it." A pause from the warden, then explain. Rio spent the next 40 minutes explaining. He talked about archive redundancy and cross-reference systems, and the way that knowledge deteriorated when it was stored without a proper structure. He was nervous and he talked too fast, and he kept pushing his hair back from his forehead, the way he did when he was thinking hard. The warden listened to all of it. Sable's examination was different from both of theirs. The warden asked it nothing. It ran a deep scan instead, biological, behavioral, cognitive, the kind of complete assessment that the Draknari had built into the warden so that it could confirm the royal line was not just alive but well. The scan took a long time. Sable sat in the center of a large chamber with its wings folded and its eyes open, and let it happen. The warden spoke when the scan was done. It spoke in old Draknari, and Sable translated quietly for Rio and Dara, who were standing at the chamber's edge. "The hatchling is healthy, psychologically stable, bonded. The bonding indicators are complete, not partial, not temporary, complete. This unit has not seen a complete bond record outside the royal clutch in 4 centuries. A pause, then, "The companions are not threats, they are not incidental. This unit does not have a framework for what they are. This unit is creating one." The chamber's lights changed warmer slightly. The cold in the air eased. The warden spoke again, formally this time, and Sable translated each phrase as it came. Dara Akafer recognized as matriarch guardian. Rio Akafer recognized as lore keeper. This unit pledges protection to the bloodline and to all bonded to the bloodline without exception, without time limit. Then the warden said something quieter, almost private, if a ship-sized machine could be private about anything. "This unit has been alone for a very long time. This unit is glad to no longer be. Sable's eyes had gone bright in a way they sometimes did when it was feeling something it didn't have a word for. It looked at Dara, it looked at Rio. Rio pulled up his translation file, the old Draknari glossary he had been building for 6 months, and searched through it until he found the word. He said it slowly. Varshan, it means home. The root form means the place where you are kept safe. Sable was quiet for a moment, then it said the word, slowly, clearly, with the smoke curling soft at each consonant. Then it looked at Dara and said it again. Dara did not say anything. She put her hand on Sable's neck the way she had done in the mud in the field on the first night, and she kept it there. Rio looked at the archive still open on the wall of the corridor behind him. All that knowledge, all those records, all those centuries of a people who were gone. He thought about what the warden had said about being alone. He thought it was a terrible thing to be, and that they were all now not. The warden did not leave. It had nowhere to go, really. It had been built for one purpose, and that purpose was now living on a farm on Caro's Landing, and so Caro's Landing was where it stayed. It settled into a permanent orbit above the planet, visible from the ground on clear nights, a dark crescent shape hanging where no moon had been. Before, enormous and quiet, the colonists of Dusters Creek watched it for about a week with great unease, and then someone pointed out that it hadn't done anything harmful, and someone else pointed out that it was technically the most powerful defensive structure within 4-star systems, and after that most people got used to it, the way people get used to things that don't kill them. The galaxy, however, was not settling. The Ardathi Syndicate's 6-person extraction team had been collected by the colonial marshal, processed, and handed over to Bureau authority, and the Bureau had handed them to the Assembly's Enforcement Division, and the Assembly had begun a full prosecution that was going to take years and end badly for the syndicate. This was satisfying. Journalists had found the planet. Researchers had found it. 3 universities sent formal requests to begin xenobiological studies. 2 governments sent diplomatic feelers. 1 very excited professor from a sultry academic institute sent a 40-page letter about Draknari historical linguistics addressed to Rio specifically, which Rio read in one sitting and then sent back a 14-page reply that caused the professor to sit down heavily and stare at his wall for some time. Caro's Landing, population 3,400, was no longer off the map. The colonists were not entirely sure how they felt about this town. Meetings were held, opinions were expressed loudly. Ferris Holt suggested charging researchers a landing fee, and was surprised to find this was popular. Dara Akafer did not attend most of the town meetings. She was busy. Inspector Boval Kren returned 18 months after the crash, and this time he came with a delegation and a proposal instead of a document case and drones. The Galactic Assembly, after 18 months of legal review, several emergency sessions, and 1 vote that required 3 recounts, had reached a formal position on the matter of the last Draknari and the humans of Caro's Landing. They wanted to establish the planet as a protected world, a seat of a reconstituted Draknari cultural trust, the first in 400 years. They wanted Sable to hold a voice on the Assembly, an advisory seat, not a binding vote, at least for now, to be expanded as circumstances allowed. Kren delivered all of this at the Akafer kitchen table. Sable was there too, folded as compactly as it could manage with its tail around one table leg, and its wings tucked so tight they were almost invisible. Dara had made tea. She offered Kren some. He took it. She listened to the full proposal, all of it. She asked questions at specific Points good questions, the kind that made Kren check his notes twice. Rio sat across from her with a tablet, writing down the parts that needed following. Up. When Kren finished, Dara put down her cup. The colonists of Caro's Landing have full sovereignty, she said. Not advisory recognition. Full. The protected status doesn't override local law. Or colonial governance. That goes into the charter. Kren said he would have to refer that to the assembly. Refer it, she said. I'll wait. She also said that Sable's participation in the assembly was entirely voluntary, would happen on Sable's schedule, and that no document, resolution, or ceremonial declaration was going to define what the last Draknari had to be, or how it had to behave. That also went into the charter. Kren wrote it all down. He had stopped being surprised by Dara Akefer some time ago. He had started to think that the galaxy had gotten extremely lucky when that pod had picked this particular antenna to fall toward. Sable addressed the assembly 3 weeks later by remote transmission from the farm. It sat in the yard with the warden visible overhead and a camera Rio had borrowed from the colonial press office, and it spoke for about 4 minutes. It thanked the assembly for its concern. It said it did not hold anyone responsible for the extinction of the Draknari. That was a matter of physics and bad luck, not malice. It said that it intended to help recover what had been lost, the history and the culture and the knowledge, and that this work would take a long time, and that it welcomed help. Then it said the thing that people remembered afterward, the thing that got quoted in the reports and repeated in the news feeds and discussed in the academic papers. It said that it had not survived because of a preservation protocol or a law or a political resolution. It had survived because a pod with broken navigation had locked onto the nearest signal it could find, which happened to be a radio antenna on a small farm, and the person who lived there had chosen to say yes when she could have said no. I knocked on the wrong door, it said. I found a family. I think about that every day. The Voakai order, after several weeks of discussion among themselves, sent Oma Delrin back with a different kind of offer, not a prophecy this time, a request. They wanted to help archive the Draknari records. They had kept the faith for 400 years, and they wanted to keep it in a way that was actually useful now. Rio met with Delrin for 3 hours. He agreed on the condition that the full archive remained open to all researchers regardless of species or affiliation. Delrin accepted. They shook hands, which was not a Voakai custom, but which Delrin had read about and thought was worth trying. Ferris Holt came by on a Saturday, which was when he usually appeared. He had a casserole dish covered in foil. He set it on the porch railing and stood there for a moment looking at the farm, at Sable curled around the barn, much too large for it now but still trying to fit, and at Rio on the roof with his charts spread out around him, legitimate ones now, sent directly from the warden's navigation archive, and at the dark crescent hanging above them all. In the late afternoon sky. Knew something was in that barn, Ferris said. 8 weeks in I knew. I know you knew, Dara said. He nodded. He handed her the casserole. He went home. That evening was quiet in the way that good evenings are quiet, full, rather than empty. Sable was where it always was now, wrapped around the outside of the barn in the cooling air, scales dark against the last light. Dara sat on the porch steps with her hands around a cup that had gone cold because she'd forgotten to drink it. Rio was on the roof, cross-legged, a star chart on his knees and the warden's archive feed running on the tablet beside him. The crescent of the warden turned slowly above them, catching the light of the sun that had almost set. Dara looked up at the stars, all of them, the ones she had always known and the ones Rio had taught her and the ones that were new to her now. named in Old Draknari in a language she was still learning. She thought about the pod, she thought about the field, and the mud and the cold and a shaking creature with gold eyes that had looked at her like it was asking a question. She hadn't really answered it out loud. She just wrapped it in a coat and carried it to the barn. One meteor, she said to the night, to no one in particular. From the roof, without looking up from his charts, pod, it was a pod. From the barn, low and warm, the sound that was almost a laugh and maybe something. More than that, not a word, something older than words, something that meant, I heard you, I am here, I am home. 3 species, 1 family, 1 farm on a world that nobody used to know the name of, sitting under a crescent that was dark and ancient and keeping watch. The stars came out one by one, the way they always did. The farm made its ordinary sounds. Everything that mattered was exactly where it was supposed to be.